Osiris Frost, and today is finally the day when we are going to talk about professions in Star Citizen. It's been a long time coming, and the reason for the delay of this episode is that it is a very broad topic, and I spent a lot of time coming at it from different angles. The more I let these ideas marinate, the more I became convinced that there is still too little information to make definitive final proclamations about the relative viability of each of the professions. However, there are a lot of things that we can infer from social dynamics in MMOs generally, which will apply equally to Star Citizen. And for that reason, I don't think it's too premature to start the discussion and to get you all thinking about things in the way I think about them, and for us to bounce ideas off of each other as we evaluate which professions we would like to pursue in Star Citizen. But before I do, I want to be upfront that some of the information I will be presenting in this video is conjectural. I don't believe that I'm making anything up here, but some ideas I'm about to present are based on reading between the lines and applying previous MMO experience as a template to Star Citizen. I will discuss things as I understand them to be, given the current state of the game. Please don't take that to mean you need to quit the org that you've been a member of for years and made friends in, or that you've picked the wrong profession and you need to melt all your ships and start over again. There is a lot of potential for CIG to deliver a revolutionary gameplay experience, and at the end of the day, if you're playing a profession that you enjoy, then maybe that enjoyment should count for more to you than absolute profits, okay? So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. For the purposes of this conversation, I would like to divide the professions of Star Citizen into three broad categories, which I came up with sort of based on how you, the player, will or will not interact with the game and the other players playing it while you attempt to earn a living at your chosen profession. These categories are customer service, and this broadly defines a set of professions where you interact directly with another player or NPC and perform work in exchange for pay. For example, repair, refuel, rearm, medical, passenger transport, maybe even construction. The next category is resource exploitation, and this is when you are interacting with the game universe directly, not necessarily another player or NPC. Examples of this include mining, salvage, maybe some aspects of science. I don't know. Science is a kind of an oddball one, and we'll address that in a few minutes. Lastly is trade, by which I mean a set of professions which falls somewhere in between the other two in terms of the direct person-to-person transactional basis of the work. Examples here would include like cargo hauling, smuggling, data running. And just to clarify a little bit, you may or may not be buying or selling directly with a discrete individual when you work in one of these fields, right? But in any case, your profit margins are likely to be affected by externalities beyond the specific parties involved in a specific transaction. All right, so some of you I know are already thinking, hey, gee, Osiris, you left out exploration and combat. What kind of a comprehensive analysis of professions is this going to be? So exploration is extremely far off as of this recording, right? And a lot of what we know or assumed to be involved is very theoretical at this point. There are likely aspects of exploration which will fit in one category or another, but until we can speak more intelligently about CIG's implementation, I thought it best to leave this one out for now. And like I said, this is the start of a conversation. We'll revisit the topic from time to time. As for combat, that one is somewhat contextual. So offering your services as a security escort would probably fall under the rubric of customer service. However, piracy, which is to say using combat or the threat of combat to acquire goods or money from another party, is actually the polar opposite of economic activity. And on that basis, I am going to exclude it from this discussion. So before I proceed onto the next phase of this video, I'd like to take a moment to invite you to weigh in on whether or not you agree with my categorization of these professions. Do you agree with me, or do you think I've miscategorized anything? Can you think of an outlying scenario which would make a certain profession apply more to a different category than the one I've put it in? Please let me know in the comments below. So, with the professions categorized, I want to now talk about an important distinction that I will apply to several professions as we move forward. That is usefulness versus profitability. So, for example, repair, refuel, and rearm gameplay is unquestionably extremely useful to Star Citizen. Players, everybody at some point in time is going to need repair, refuel, or rearm services. Players who pursue this trade will certainly be kept very busy in the verse. However, as I'll discuss, there are certain factors which I believe will hamper your ability to rake in the cash. We'll just put it that way for now. I know a few things because I've seen a few things. I've been playing MMOs since the days of Ultima Online. I've played many major titles over the ensuing years, including Star Wars Galaxies, World of Warcraft, Star Wars The Old Republic, The Elder Scrolls Online, several others. In many of these titles, matter of fact, all these titles I've played with a guild, and I've met many other people along the way who each have their own MMO pedigree and experience base. The common denominator between virtually everyone I've ever spoken to about our history in MMOs is that overwhelmingly guilds, or as they're known in Star Citizen, organizations, they tend to foster a social environment in which service to your fellow org mates is strongly encouraged, while profiting off of your fellow org mates is strongly discouraged. Another facet to this is that when you are in an org, it is very likely that you are going to transact the bulk of your business within that org. Let's take a quick detour to address a case study. Let's say that you're a hauler and you're carrying a load of valuable commodities through dangerous space, right? Now let's say that your ship breaks down and you need a repair. You could fire off a service beacon, and maybe an enterprising solo Vulcan operator might just be sitting around waiting to answer the call. After all, isn't that the point of service beacons? Isn't that why they were introduced to Star Citizen? The problem with this is that in so doing, you're also potentially broadcasting your whereabouts and ship status to bad actors in the verse. Service beacons represent gameplay opportunities for non-org-aligned players to socially interact, yes, but due to the risks involved, most people would probably just ping org chat or Discord and ask somebody they can trust to lend a hand. As with anything else, there are always going to be exceptions to every rule, but my experiences lead me to believe that this is a nearly universal truth, which it is important to consider and understand when choosing how you're going to play Star Citizen. Most players will join an organization, as in fact the point of an MMO is social interaction and grouping to conquer content that you can't do by yourself. To that end, certain content will be accessible only by groups. That said, there are always those who will prefer to go it alone in MMOs, or maybe with just a small group of friends. These will be a small minority of the player base, though, and while they will exist, their opportunities for them to earn a living in the verse will likely be affected by their non-org affiliated status, as I've just described with my reference to service beacons. So, it is out of consideration for all of the preceding preamble that I will now get to the point, right? I will now discuss each of the three profession categories within the context of MMO social dynamics. And again, my hope here isn't to say that such and such a profession is or is not going to be profitable, but rather to provide a roadmap for players and org leaders to follow in order to balance the considerations of playing the game with others against the completely normal desire to get ahead with hard work and skill. Let's get to it. So first up is customer service. I'll start this one out by saying that I see a lot of potential for this playstyle to be disappointingly low on the profitability scale compared to what a lot of people's expectations are. Based on my earlier comments, I see many people spinning their wheels doing a ton of work to benefit org mates, but not really coming out ahead financially. This will be exacerbated if you are in a larger org because there's going to be greater demand for your services, and you're going to feel that much more burnt out because you're always running around helping Jimmy, who doesn't know how to fly his 890 jump, smashing into an asteroid again, but you're not getting compensated for the level of effort. And it's going to lead to a situation that can be possibly resentful. This is a bad situation, and it's going to be incumbent on org leadership to be proactive and try to avoid situations where people who are working in good faith to benefit their org are feeling taken advantage of. My recommendation here is that maybe you sort of do an all-encompassing approach, right? You pitch membership in your org as coming with a certain set of benefits like on-call repair or medical help, but that the other side of the coin is that these services should be subsidized by org dues. To boil it down to a single sentiment, make sure that everybody feels taken care of and not taken advantage of. I do also, while I'm on the subject, want to address a couple things here. I know that CIG right, have pitched us on gameplay case studies over the years. For example, there's a pretty well-known one. I think there was a design doc on it of flying your Hope-class Endeavor out to a remote battlefield and then charging people a fee to respawn on your hospital beds. I question the validity of this approach. It simply doesn't seem realistic for most people to attempt without organizational support. You don't want to take that ship somewhere dangerous without a strong escort. And again, you probably won't be charging your org mates for that kind of a service. Also, you probably won't be offering that kind of a service to your enemies because they're just going to try to hijack the ship as soon as they respawn in your medbay. I further assert that end-to-end org integrity will count for a lot more given the social dynamics of Star Citizen and other MMOs, whereas a third-party specialized company might make financial sense in real life. I think that you're not going to have like these independent people who are just like tagging along for an organization's fleet action. Big orgs are going to pay a lot of credence to OPSEC, and they're not going to want to discuss, hey, we're going to take everybody to Pyro tomorrow, and we're going to kill all the pirates. It's just not going to be advertised. It doesn't make sense that it would be. So I guess my point is that there's going to be somewhat less of that going on than people presumed based on reading that design doc back in the day and thinking, hey, I could see myself doing that sort of gameplay. Now, when it comes to things like base construction, I suppose it's just too early to call. I was pessimistic on the long-term viability of this gameplay when it came out. I'm warming to it somewhat based on we're looking at things like cargo decks and refinery decks, and I could see player-operated functionality in planet-side facilities and probably eventually in space stations that players build themselves being something or giving longevity to construction sort of gameplay. But this is, again, it's a little too early to make pronouncements on this. So let's do another one. How about passenger transport? Brother, it hurts me to be the one to have to tell you this, but I flatly refuse to believe that passenger transport will ever amount to viable gameplay. And you can't change my mind. I'm sorry. Then there's the case of the Aegis Vulcan. This ship is really only suitable as a roadside assist vehicle in a game which I don't think is going to have a large market demand for roadside assistance. The ship exists as in sort of a catch-22 paradigm where it's really only suitable for operating in safe space, you know? However, some of the hallmarks of safe space are that there is abundant infrastructure, there are several landing zones in close proximity to one another, and few, if any, threats to warrant the actual need for repair, refuel, and rearm gameplay in the first place. So I'm not saying no, nobody will ever need these type of services in Terra. I am saying that it will be so infrequent that if this is what you're banking on as your occupation, you're going to become bored and you're going to lose money operating a Vulcan under these conditions. When you do decide to move up to more dangerous areas of space, you're probably also going to graduate into a larger ship and simultaneously become reliant upon a security detail or an escort to operate safely. So I'm not really optimistic that there's tremendous opportunity for non-org-aligned customer service players to get work often enough to turn much profit. This will obviously be somewhat contingent upon the instantiation of NPC quanta who require those services and who are likely being overlooked by org players who are going to have their hands full taking care of their own people. Quanta is this whole other thing that's still sort of a ways off, though, so rather than go down on that tangent at this time, I'm going to switch topics to the next category of professions, which is resource exploitation. Conversely, this is exactly the type of gameplay that you can make profitable for solo players or small crews because it's all about you. It's about your patience, your determination, your hustle. Once you find a derelict ship or a mineable asteroid, there's nothing limiting your ability to extract 100% of the value from that asset. The balancing act here is not figuring out ways to compensate your salvagers or miners, but instead finding ways to limit the need for logistical support to the smallest possible overhead. Salvage and mining crews will have to work with their orgs to find an acceptable level of support that works for both parties without the org going all in on security and then handing the salvagers or the miners the bill for an enormous oversized detail. Whereas customer service type players may experience more satisfaction in larger orgs that can subsidize their activities, it's a bit less clear that a large org can be of benefit to resource exploiters. Now, I am well aware that there are several large asteroid belts in the verse, and I can see the potential for an enormous scale mining operation to be planned and executed. And I know that many people are intent on exactly that sort of gameplay, where you have many, many Orions and moles and prospectors all working in concert with cargo ships coming and going and being escorted along trade lanes, and just a giant operation being carried out 24/7 over a long period of time, and orgs just raking in the cash, right? Like, I know that everybody thinks that this is going to be a huge thing, and probably it will be. But what I do want to mention at this juncture is, based on my understanding of what has been discussed by CIG with respect to risk versus reward gameplay, I have to assume that these sorts of operations are going to be essentially under constant assault from all directions by Vanduul and pirates, right? Not to mention rival mining companies. Recall that each vehicle in these mega fleets works or travels from place to place, and the whole time they're essentially querying a random number generating system. And so more ships means more opportunities to get a hit on the RNG. And so my opinion, based purely on my understanding of Tony Z's Quanta panel from the last couple of sitcoms, is that the bigger your group is, the more hassle you're going to invite upon yourself. And this is a dimension of the game that, if proven true, will have ramifications for how players group up. So when you think of old school MMOs simply limiting your party size to an arbitrary number based on the static balance of the game, Quanta is, in a sense, dynamic game balance. And it should scale appropriately whether you have a group of 5 or a group of 5,000. So anyway, my point is that I think there's this assumption in the community that you're going to be able to basically brute force certain gameplay just by having a huge org and just sending enough guys at it. And I kind of assume that this is the presumption behind very large orgs forming around a single aspect of gameplay, like 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 member organizations who all want to do salvage. Okay. But, keep in mind that it's going to be hard to do salvage when the Quanta system summons about a dozen kingships on your position because of how many people you have out. Just food for thought. Maybe it won't work out that way, but it is something to give consideration to when you're, and don't take it as a foregone conclusion that you can just throw numbers of people at problems and that'll solve whatever minor inconvenience happens. I think that the inconvenience is going to be scaled based on the presence of people in an area, whether or not even they're necessarily in a party together. Anyway, time will tell on that. So for me, I'm banking on a sweet spot for this type of gameplay being like small to medium orgs who operate in efficient teams. As for science, that's this whole other umbrella category, and I think that it will probably encompass some aspects or some elements of resource exploitation, and I really don't see this profession getting any attention paid to it within the next 2 years, though. So I'm going to hold off on passing judgment on it for now. I'll continue to speak about it throughout this video in kind of broad terms, but again, it's too early to tell until they start implementing the systems of that gameplay. So last but not least, that leaves trade. And arguably, the profitability of this gameplay style will be much more heavily based on organizational support than any of the other two categories I've mentioned. Nearly all trading operations are going to require some element of logistical support, such as security and support ships. And also, definitely don't discount this. When it comes to bulk commodities, smart traders are going to be buying and selling based on market conditions, which necessarily means that there will be long or short-term storage of goods, warehousing in effect. And we're just starting to scratch the surface of this gameplay with the upcoming cargo decks. In any case, there are absolutely going to be costs associated with all of the above, and these will be factored into org operating expenses. And I say org operating expenses because it is exceedingly unlikely that players individual players will be able to meet the sheer volume of the costs associated with operations of this scale. You think in particular of operating a hull D or a hull E, and they're just going to be the astronomical costs associated with the logistics of that. So yeah, I think that you're really going to be heavily dependent on an org structure to execute something like a transport mission with the hull E. Yeah, 100%. For all those reasons, it's easy to imagine that haulers are going to be even more dependent on cooperation between players than most any other industrialist in the game. Now, conversely, smuggling, by its very nature, eschews the coordination and cooperation that other haulers engage in as a matter of course. The proposition behind smuggling is high-risk, high-reward gameplay. Smugglers rely on exotic cargo with discrete clientele to deliver high margins with each mission. They are operating in an entirely different business paradigm from other players. And for these reasons, I believe that smuggling is going to be one of those things where the men get separated from the boys, meaning that right now, in Alpha, a lot of people think they like the idea of smuggling, but once the risk-reward balance starts becoming more of a thing, many of the fair-weather smugglers will move on to more comfortable gameplay. It's like that saying, everybody wants to be a gangster until it's time to do gangster shit, right? Those people who stick it out and do well will be very well compensated for their troubles in smuggling, and without the downside of having to split profits between too many people. So in that sense, you could think of smuggling as sort of the commoditization of risk. In a very similar vein, data running is the commoditization of time. And data runners deal in information which may or may not be illegal in nature, so their risk will vary based on what they're selling. But the main challenge in forecasting the execution of this gameplay is that we don't know too much about the in-universe systems CIG is constructing to regulate the flow of information. And we have some of that now where you have the comm relays, right? And in order to avoid notifying the UEE that you're doing some nefarious activity, you shut off a comm relay, and then the word never gets physically transmitted to the authorities. But until we know more about what other ideas CIG has up its sleeve, I think it's realistic that much of the transactional basis of data runners is going to be performed offline or outside of the game, rather. And if I were set on being an information broker, I would establish a Discord in which I screen clientele based on a number of criteria and distribute information to people, possibly based on their financial support, right? You could set up a Patreon, make a name for yourself. People would pay like $25 a month for access to your channel, and then you would just directly get information. You post it right in the Discord. Boom, that cuts out all the possibility, one, that your data is going to get intercepted. It makes it so that people feel like they're paying for exclusive access to information. There's a lot of potential here for you to metagame the shit out of this profession, and I just don't see how CIG is going to get around that, but they got time. Maybe they can surprise me. Maybe they have ideas that I haven't figured out yet. So, and whatever the monetary cost associated with something like that is, I can see it easily being defrayed amongst many members of an org. Maybe to be an org officer, you just pay $1 a month is one of your responsibilities to the org, and then that goes right to this sort of fund, whatever. The whole scheme would provide material benefit to membership in that org, however, and it would be entirely outside of the purview of CIG to regulate it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my intuition tells me that information brokers are going to work hand in hand with science and exploration vessels to generate usable information, which will then be distributed via the means I've just described, more than likely. And on that basis, the entire premise of data running ships, to me, has come to be sort of illusory. So think about this. Under the circumstances I've just described, what is the purpose of a ship that moves data within the mechanisms of the game? Food for thought. So I'll leave it there for now. I know that that's a ton to unpack, but as I've said, I wanted this video to get your thought processes moving with regards to the implementation of professions rather than to make final declarations about said professions at this early stage. I hope that any of the ideas in this video have spurred those processes within your mind, and that maybe they've helped you decide on a profession, or maybe even raised an important concern or question within you about a profession that you thought you had decided upon. If any of that applies to you, I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. This episode will certainly bear a lot of follow-up in the future, in particular following the implementation of the Quanta system, the addition of some more star systems to Star Citizen, the advent of full persistence, and so on and so forth. Not to mention that some of the professions that I've just referenced today straight up don't exist in the game yet. All of that said, if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell for future updates. If you or a friend are new to Star Citizen, feel free to use my referral code, which you'll see in the end screen of this video, to earn 5,000 UEC in-game. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. I've been Osiris Frost, and I'll see you in the next one.